Nick, thank you for talking with me. I'd like to start at the very beginning, which was where and when were you born?
I was born January 1946 in San Francisco.
So that makes you an Aquarian?
Right.
And do you identify with being visionary, future thinking, um, I would say control? Maybe that's not the word, but not like an Aries, exuberant, out there kind of person.
Right. No, I'm much more grounded.
Yeah, but it's an air sign.
Yeah. Well, it's a water sign, I thought.
No, air.
Huh?
It's you're right. He's a water bear, but Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra are air signs.
Ah, interesting. Huh.
And then what about siblings?
I had three sisters. One sister died, and I had two older sisters originally and one younger sister.
So they say that middle children can tend to be mediators, maybe nonconformists. I mean, what was it like for you being the middle? But it's different probably because you were the only boy.
Yeah,
What was that like?
exactly. Um, Not very seen, not very understood. Not sure that anybody in the family really knew what to do with me.
Because you were different, how?
Well, because I was a different sex, and probably also because I had ADD, so I was kind of a spacey kid. And
And then how did you go on to college and get your master's with ADD? What suggestions do you have since so many kids today have it?
um, well, it wasn't until I was in graduate school that I started to get any decent grades. Actually. School was always kind of a problem for me. I didn't quite know what to do, and nobody could figure it out. I didn't figure out that I had ADD until I was like 43 years old. Um, so it took being in graduate school in a field that really interested me to really bring my focus in.
How would you define ADD for you besides easily distracted and maybe a lot of times kind of hyper?
I wasn't so much hyper. I was more sort of easygoing, spacey, um, lived in my own world a lot.
How did that affect your thinking about what it meant to be a man? I interviewed recently two young men in their early 20s, and even they said in middle school they got a lot of messages about what you don't do. I mean, you don't want to be like a girl. You don't want to be a wimp or a sissy. But it seems like they didn't really get messages about what you do. What do you think in hindsight were the messages that you got? And was your dad in the home?
Yeah, yeah. Dad was there. He was a pretty quiet guy, very kind and quiet. I don't think he really knew much about being a dad. At least he didn't know what to do with me unless we were on a horse. If we were on a horse, we were pretty in tune with each other. Um, but yeah, in terms of it was a lot of probably direct and indirect influence in terms of what a good man is based on what the women in my family were encountering.
So they would say, "Oh, I went out with this guy. He was such a jerk. He didn't call me."
Right, right. So I learned how to be gentlemanly.
Which means you open the door and
Right,
if you sleep with someone, you call them afterwards.
right, right. Which I would have to admit that um, it was sort of a non-acceptance process, and so um, and non-acceptance in that as a male, unique male that I was not really very accepted. I was more trying to be shaped into what I should be. And so, yeah, there was a certain period in my life when I said, screw this. I'm not doing this open the door stuff anymore. Let's get some equality going here.
You became a mechanic before you became a marriage and family therapist. How
Right.
did you decide on one and then the other?
Well, I'd always liked mechanical things when I was growing up. I liked tinkering with things. And there was a certain family influence there, and that, well, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. And so I pushed back and said, okay, well, if that's not what I'm supposed to be doing, I'm going to be doing that. So I did that for 25 years.
And did you go to university as an undergraduate in those 25 years or not?
Yeah, before that, I had a degree in art with a minor in religion. Um, I had a BA at that point.
So you did do what you were supposed to do. I mean, you went to university.
Yeah, right, right. Although, my mother was an artist, my father was an architect, and so I
Mm-hmm.
just figured, well, I must supposed to be something in the arts, and so that's what I did, and I didn't fit particularly well.
Hmm. And then what was the impetus to say, I'm going to be a therapist?
Being in therapy myself, and the therapist saying, have you ever considered becoming a therapist? Because you'd be a good therapist.
Because you know how to listen.
Uh huh. And I'm also very interested in how people work.
Mm. Um, and then you said you didn't get really terrific grades. So how did you get into Psych Grad School? Because that's competitive.
Yeah. How did I do that? I don't really remember. I applied. I think I had decent enough undergraduate grades that I could get in.
Mm-hmm. And then did your family think, okay, he's finally seen the light?
No, no. They didn't
Why?
have any idea at all about me becoming a therapist.
So they were neutral, not approving or disapproving?
Um, on the surface, yes. It's hard to say. I think they sort of approved. I think they wish I'd become a doctor or a psychiatrist,
Oh,
something like that, or a
oh,
psychoanalyst, or
got it. Um, you were in a men's group, and what got you interested in thinking about men's roles in particular and being in a men's group?
um, I'd say well, certainly there was an influence from growing up in a family full of women where maleness was not expressed much or wasn't found much. Well, my dad had male friends. Um, he wasn't a typical male, I think. Um, so, then I think because I liked the companionship of men, I joined men's groups. I think that was after finding group work being useful uh, for both men and women. I was in a group. I was did a long group with Shakti Gawain for a long time. And that kind of led me, from the interaction with the other men in the group, that kind of led me to being interested in learning about other men, working, connecting with other men.
And do you find that your clients over the years have, in fact, been a majority men? I mean, usually women are the ones who are help seekers. So I wonder if you've been able to get men in the office.
Yeah, I've had, right now I work just with couples. I have a few single people, uh, men and women, but not, I think just like four. Um, and in my practice before I started doing much couple therapy, I would say it was pretty balanced. There was probably more women most of the time, but it was pretty balanced.
And what I'm trying to understand is that the different men's leaders, therapists that I'm talking with, they think of men at a disadvantage in terms of a relationship with women, that women are more emotionally intelligent, they say, more verbal. Men avoid conflict because they have a greater arousal level. It's more uncomfortable for them to be in these kind of exchanges. So I'm trying to figure out, is that purely biological? Is it socialization? Do you agree with that idea that women have more skill in terms of relationships? I'm struggling to understand this.
Yeah. On the surface, it appears that way, but my emotionally focused therapy work, which is predominantly what I do, um, women are traditionally, or typically, I would say, more expressive emotionally most of the time. But that does not necessarily mean that they are in contact with the feeling
Hmm.
or able to hold the feeling rather than blurt it out without being really connected to it.
Wow, that's interesting.
Men have a harder time. Um, it's kind of a myth, I think, that men don't have feelings.
Of
You come
course.
into the world with feelings,
Of course.
and yeah, there's a lot of conditioning that everybody goes through that can put layers over the feelings and make them harder to contact. Um, but I find, with some work that men oftentimes have very deep feelings.
Of course, they're human.
Hmm. Right.
And so, what do you do in a men's group or in therapy that gets past some of those layers that men don't show vulnerability or fear or cry or need or whatever? How do you get underneath those conditionings?
Well, you have to validate the defenses there, that it makes sense. Of course, in the world that you grew up in, with where you were and having to survive in the world, that you develop that. It may not work very well in getting you connected, but you had to develop that to survive. So, particularly working with cops or firemen or people like that, they're extra well defended because of their work. And, it's harder to present the idea that there is more to you than just your mind and that is also useful and that you're missing a large part of you.
Um, why do men come to you? I mean, in couples, a lot of times they come because the wife says, "We've got to go to a therapist. I'm going to
Hmm.
leave you if you don't come in."
Right.
Why have individual men come in of their own volition?
Um, I think, um, well, it depends on the age, particularly men about my own age have gotten to a point in time where life is not yielding for them what they're looking for.
Hmm.
That sense of meaning and connection and usefulness. And so there can be kind of depression and lostness that sets in, and that men, sometimes want to find help for that. They want to become more alive again. at least finding reason to be in the planet still. And so that oftentimes brings them in. Younger men, oftentimes come in because they're struggling in relationship. Um, and, it is definitely, different ages, there are different things that are going on. And so younger men are more involved in trying to create a profession, trying to sort of establish themselves in the world. And that takes up a lot of their life. And so the useful idea of therapy may not be there.
So are you saying that young men are not likely to come and see you?
Um, it's not that they're not likely; they're less likely.
Okay. Um, I think that your men's group met with my women's group at my house. Do you have any memory of that?
No,
Okay.
but that.
And
Uh,
I was trying to think about it because I think there was some kind of like a tension or some kind of competitive thing, and I was hoping that you would remember what that was, but that was a long time ago. When you were are you still in a men's group?
no, I haven't been in a men's group for a long time.
What did you notice about what men wanted to talk about? I mean, because usually the stereotype is we solve problems, we talk about sports, we go get a beer, we kind of stay on the surface. So how did the men's group get below the surface?
Well, I think it oftentimes took somebody saying, "Okay, wait a minute, let's get out of our heads. Let's get into our hearts. Let's see what's really going on. How is life for you? What are you struggling with?" And oftentimes it would come down to relationships. And that's one of the places where a lot of men are struggling: a lack of acceptance from their wives, or just not knowing how to connect with them, feeling the distance in the relationship.
And what were the tools that help make that connection for men?
Well, I think typically somebody has to break the ice. They have to go drop into their own vulnerability.
Mm.
And that vulnerability does not always beget vulnerability in others, but it kind of begins to open things a little bit. And if there was a theme that was there, that's a common theme that men go through, and somebody could speak to that from a vulnerable place, that would often sort of trigger a softening for other people.
So you're saying that themes were, I'm not connecting with my wife. She doesn't want to have. You didn't say this, but she doesn't want to have sex as often as I want to have.
Mm-hmm.
What were other themes?
A lack of meaning in life, from not finding work that was right for them, woundedness from either father or mother from before that have left them with a damaged sense of self-worth, um, or an idea that was imprinted on them by a parent that really did not fit, that they've been struggling with for many years.
And then how did that understanding carry over into your own marriage? And how long have you been married at this point?
First marriage, I was married for, I think, 15 years. Second marriage, this one is going on 30.
That's Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Neat. And what did you learn from that first marriage?
What did I learn? Well, I learned that we were not a good match. Um, and I think, when I first got into the marriage, I was in a different place. And then as time went on, I began to find my own sort of interest in going deeper into psychology and spirit, and I don't think she was really wanting to go that way. And so I could feel myself growing into this other world and was developing friends and relationships in a different place. And we were struggling. We didn't really connect very well for a long time.
So who you like 80%, I'm not 70% of divorces in the US are initiated by women. Was that the case for you in your first marriage?
No, I initiated it.
Uh-huh. Did you have kids?
2 kids.
And how have you kept up the fathering relationship after divorce?
Um, well, I think, particularly right after divorce, I probably wasn't the best father. I was really involved in sort of finding myself, and I didn't spend as much time with my kids, especially my son, who came to stay with me, and my daughter stayed with her mother. Um, but I have my son Josh has a brain injury from a car accident he was in 20 years ago, and so I spend a lot of time. He's doing pretty well. He just had some pretty intensive brain surgery to try to stop seizures. Um, and I spend quite a bit of time with him, just sort of being with him, enjoying his company.
Does he live with you now?
No, he lives on his own here in Chico.
Oh, good. The men's movement puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of fathers spending time with their sons. And they think it's really difficult for men if they're primarily raised by women. And that's a big central core of problems for men, is being raised so much by mothers. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, it's so individual, There's certainly men that I know that were very soft and available as fathers and being good fathers to them when their children were young. And I think that's changed over the years, that there's a lot more value placed in being a father, staying at home, being a stay-home father, or all those sort of things is a lot more accepted and valued these days than it was in the past. And so, really, I think children need both, and both mother and father. And even as I say that, I realize it's pretty hard to sort of categorize fathers are like this and mothers are like this, because I think they were all individual, and that changes. Certainly, there is something to be said for the in utero experience, the nursing experience, all that sort of stuff that a mother goes through with her child. Creates a lot of closeness and a lot of bonding that's there, and it's the beginning of the attachment process. But I think attachment with father, maybe not immediately, but pretty soon, is also equally important.
Warren Farrell thinks that there are really distinct parenting styles, that men teach limit setting, risk taking, roughhousing, the kind of put down jokes that men do with each other that are funny, but little put down games. So he thinks that if boys don't get that, and girls, that they really aren't going to be as successful because they haven't learned to set boundaries and be disciplined and take risks and all that. What do you think of that?
It's a little too sharp a categorization, I think, for me. I don't think it's quite as narrow as that. Because I think they need both. And I certainly have known women who would roughhouse with their kids, too. And I've known women who have set boundaries with kids as well. And I've known men that were, they were softer fathers, and the women set the boundaries. So, it's hard to sort of narrow it down into those categories like that.
Mm-hmm. So in your own marriage, your 30-year marriage, how have you kept it vital and interesting? Because decades are long. How do you keep from getting bored or taking each other for granted?
Well, we've done a fair amount of couple therapy, which has been helpful for sure. Um, and Elizabeth has her own career, and she's very successful at that, and that occupies a lot of her life. And I'm probably closer to retirement now than she is. And there are different dilemmas that show up at different times in your life. Like, I may be retired before she is, and then how are we going to work our time together, time apart? Um, and we have similar interests. We like to camp. We like to be outside a lot, and I've introduced her to scuba diving and horseback riding and all those kind of things, which I love, and she picks up on those things and she likes those too. So that that's helped a lot to sort of keep the spark going.
And how does one keep romance alive if you know someone so well? How do you keep that kind of passion or tingle?
Well, I think that's challenging. I think there's an idea that I've sort of been working with and trying to develop, which I call connected differentiation, where there's room for your own differentiation process at the same time as staying connected to the other person. And that entails a kind of compassion and empathy for the effect of that differentiation on the other person, because it's not always going to feel good to them. But I think that potential connected difference also brings in a kind of liveness, spark to the relationship.
What's an example of a difference that you're willing to share that you've worked on in the marriage?
Well, I think, let's see. I think it shows up around things like, no, if she wants to do something, she has a house in Marin that she's trying to trade for a house someplace else, because it's been hard having this house in Marin, and because she bought it a long time ago, there would be large capital gains, so she's trying to do an exchange. And so she's wanted to have a house in Mendocino. And because I've got so much on my plate right now, I am not quite so big in that. So trying to express to her that, when I think about the amount of work and the time and the energy that it's going to take to have a house in Mendocino, I don't feel very good about that. It makes me feel more burdened. And so with that, I know that's going to be disappointing for her, because she wants me to join her in that. But the connected point comes with, well, okay, so now that I am considering that, and I'm letting you know this is my difference here, this is the way this feels to me, how is that for you? So it's that other part. I mean, I think for a while do you know who Snarch is?
No.
Oh, you should look him up. I think it's David Snarch.
How do you spell snarch?
Snarch. It's like it's Narch or something like that.
Okay.
Uh, and he's sort of a differentiation guy. He and Susan Johnson do not like each other very much. And I made the mistake once at a Susan Johnson. I've been studying the EFT process for, gosh, I don't know, 12 years now or something like that. And so I went to a lot of seminars, did a lot of training. And at one of the earlier seminars that I was at, Susan Johnson had just shown a video clip of her work with a couple. And I thought it was also a good example of differentiation. And so I stuck up my hand with much trepidation, and she said yes. And I said, well, I think that's also a good example of differentiation, not knowing that she did not like David Snarch and David Snarch's idea about differentiation. I got a 20-minute lecture standing there.
Oh. Because she doesn't think we should differentiate. I mean, we have to. We're individuals.
Well, she had her thinking around differentiation is that it's not differentiated from, it's differentiated with. Where David Snarch is differentiated from.
Okay. In your own marriage, how, maybe comparing the first and second, how have your attachment styles evolved? Because you're a recovering withdrawing attachment style in terms of Sue Johnson's system. So how does one change a core personality structure?
Well, I think, you develop a withdrawing defense because early on in a relationship you didn't know, or you didn't have people that you could turn to for comfort and to share your own vulnerable needs. And so you turn inward then. But you've still got this problem. If you're needing comfort because you're emotionally upset, you still got this problem. I can't get that comfort that I'm needing from you, but I still got the discomfort. And so consequently then what I do is I begin to defend myself against the discomfort because it's too hard. And it's unbearable just on my own. And so I distance myself from it, and I grow these defenses that also keep me away from myself some. And that's part of the dilemma about working with withdrawers, both men and women, in couple therapy, is that they've protected themselves by not being very connected with their own feelings. And the idea, just the basic idea, that you could find comfort in another person sometimes is an idea that has sort of left the nest a long time ago. And, oh, really? You can?
So how do you change that? How do you help your clients?
Well, the defense, you can't make defenses wrong. If you make defenses wrong, you lose right away. So, the defenses have to be validated. Yeah, of course, that's the way it was for you when you were growing up. That was the world you were in. People didn't know what to do with you, and you didn't seem to be able to connect with them in a way that would help. So you have to validate those defenses as, yeah, it made sense back then. Otherwise, it becomes, oh, this is another place where I'm wrong. This is another place where I'm failing. This is another place where I'm inadequate. All that kind of stuff. So if you validate the defenses, then that begins to give you an entryway to, well, what is that like? What's that feel like underneath that when you feel it? Yeah, that made sense to be that way. That's what begins to soften the exterior so that you can begin to make contact, and so can they, through a process of suggestion, empathic conjecture, any number of things, that, well, could it be that it feels like this some? You give them suggestions to have words to begin to put to the feelings that are there, then you begin to encounter the idea of, okay, well, so I have these words. What's the usefulness of this? So then you start to encourage the expression of that. Well, in a relationship, you know, even though you may be with somebody who's more emotionally expressive, suddenly if you start expressing your own emotions, the other person is going to be taken back. They're not going to know what to do with that either. And so then you have to work the reactive response that the other person has and sort of open that up into a softening for them. And it's hard, you know, in the beginning, because I think most people that are defended, particularly withdrawers, you encourage a more vulnerable expression, and they move forward with that, and they're not met with a very soft landing in their partner. And then they say, oh, well, that was a mistake. I don't want to do that again. And so you have to keep working it, because it's, you know, it's not going to change just once.
So your first marriage kind of fit into the withdrawal pattern because you didn't have to interact a whole lot.
Right.
And then as you matured, you said, okay, I want to have more intimacy.
Well, yeah. And as, you know, as I was being worked in my own therapy, it became apparent, oh, there is more. There is something worth going after here. There is something worth sharing.
In you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's relational. It's worth sharing with another person, that you can get something back from that.
May I ask what type of bonding you picked in your second marriage? You're the recovering withdrawer. What is she, and how do they fit?
She's a pursuer, I would say. And that's, you know, that's usually the dance, withdrawer and pursuer, doing this thing back and forth. And, you know, it's a good question about, well, what is it that really attracts us to another person? That it's beyond how they look. I mean, it's certainly a part of it, but there's more that's driving that force.
I always think of it like the underneath of the iceberg. You don't see it, but it's 80% or whatever, and that's what really propels us. And all the therapists that I read say we tend to attract the opposite so we can heal our wounds and get balanced.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I would say opposite. I think, you know, it's common that we attract somebody that has a similar trait to our most wounding parent. So that we, once again, I can make this work. Once again, maybe I can get them to come around to my side to see me and all that kind of stuff, you know. But I think, you know, that's sort of the undercurrent that's there, and we have to be somewhat disabused of that.
Is that what you did in your first marriage? She was kind of like your dad?
That would be more like my mother. She could be like my mother in some ways. My mother was very critical.
Sue Johnson says that the most typical pattern is the woman pursues. Talk to me, talk to me. He withdraws because he doesn't know how to handle this. And then she pursues more and he withdraws more. And it's a vicious downward spiral. So how do you get out of it?
Well, usually what happens is, yeah, there's a pursuer and withdrawer. The pursuer is, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Yeah, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. And withdrawer is like going, out of here, until the withdrawer gets to a place where they say, fuck it, back off. And then the other woman, or the pursuer, then withdraws. And then the withdrawer is in this place, oh, okay, at peace. Oh, but wait a minute, what's going on with her? And then they start to come out and go the other direction.
Oh.
Then pursuer says, "Oh, you're interested in me now? Well, fuck you. I'm not going to talk to you." Until they soften some, and then they start to come forward more, and then, here they come, and they usually come forward with blame or criticism or something like that that
You
causes.
always.
Oh, right.
And then, so how the heck do you get out of that?
Well, you have to first of all get people to recognize this is the dance. We call it in EFT, we call it the negative cycle. And you have to begin to recognize the cycle, what you do, what the need is, what you're expecting for the other person, what your story about the other person is, what the story is about yourself. Underlying that are unmet needs. And you can't quite get to those unmet needs until you can undo some of the story that you've got there about the other person and about yourself. And dismantling the defenses, the sort of more reactive, harsh defenses that are there.
So the underlying need is to bond, and which means that you feel like you have support and security. Is that the underlying need?
Well, the underlying needs are more to be heard, to be understood, to be valued, to feel secure, to feel safe, to feel like somebody has your back.
Why is it that it's more often the woman who's the pursuer and the man who's the withdrawer? Why is that? Is it biological? Is it sociological? Is it both? What's the deal? Is that true around the world?
I don't know if that's true around the world. That's a really good question. I'm sure somebody in the EFT world has done some research on that. I think it's because women, are generally brought up in an environment where their emotions have words put to it. Oh, well, you're feeling sad. Oh, well, this is going on. As an infant, you have the feeling, but you don't have the words for that. And so as a mom is there, and most often a mom, and she's feeding you back that information, the words that fit that, then you develop a language more. Whereas with boys, that in the past at least, that has not been done as much. And there's probably a biological part of that too, where boys, no, I don't even think that's true. Because I think I read some research where actually boys are more sensitive. Young boys are more sensitive than girls, biologically.
Oh, yeah, because of this arousal thing. Testosterone makes you react, and so it's more punishing to react to something because of your...
Yeah. I don't know if it's that as much as it is there's just a greater sensitivity that's there. But it gets acculturated in a way, an environment where you're not supposed to be like that. And so it disappears, it goes inside.
One of the mothers of teenagers that I interviewed for the marriage book said that she could only say one or two sentences to her teenage boys, and then they would tune out and they would grunt in response. No, yes. And that doesn't prepare a boy for a relationship with a woman. What's going on there?
No, it doesn't. Right. But it's again, see, I think with teenagers, with particularly boys like that, you have to approach them from a place where you let them know you're curious about what's going on inside. That it's not about a failing, it's not about a fault, it's not about that you're just this adolescent oaf, but it's more, I want to know you. I want to know what's going on in there. And that can feel intrusive to boys too. Because they're embarrassed or ashamed of what they see emerging in them.
That it might be seen as vulnerable or weak.
Yeah, right.
I want to talk more about EFT, but What do you see in terms of the reasons for increasing numbers of teens in the Western world, I would say, who are anxious and depressed? And girls are more likely to present with anxiety, and then number two, depression. Is it boys just don't feel free to talk about it, or are girls really more anxious and depressed? What do you think?
I think girls are, have been acculturized to be able to put words to it easier. They have the language, they have the words. They also may feel like, because I think in general, young girls also get together and they share more than boys do. Boys get into more of a competitive place, playing sports or doing things like that. And there you're supposed to be strong and you're supposed to be able to win and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so weakness is not looked upon as a good thing. So yeah, I think with boys, I mean, it's sad that teenage boys go through that, and certainly I think there's a lot of discomfort in themselves at that point. And I don't know if a young boy who's had a lot of close contact with a parent always has that same uncomfortableness in themselves, or if that close contact that provides healthy mirroring, that healthy mirroring and curiosity about who they are, I think really helps to grow more of a secure self. And partly, I'd be curious to see if it's changing very much, but, boys had to sort of find themselves on the sports field. That was the thing that they did, playing baseball or basketball or things like that. That's where they found themselves.
Or being in a band.
Or being in a band. Yeah, that's another
one.
Group. There was an interesting thing. I don't know if you read it, but it was in the New York Times about why is it that people are, just sort of roughly paraphrasing this, why is it that people want to hang on to the big lie? Why do they want to hang on to the Trump stories? As opposed to looking at the news and saying, well, look at that. Maybe that's not so true. But they hang on to the story because it makes them a member of a group.
Oh, we wear red hats and we have Trump flags in our house.
Right. And I know something.
I know Hillary Clinton drinks baby's blood, and that makes me really in the know.
Right. It makes me in the know, and it gives me a certain sense of membership and a kind of power, and it's kind of a sad state of affairs for us. But
yeah, since millions of people are in that club. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that explains a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I hear a lot in terms of divorces is the woman says, I'm working, I'm managing the house, I'm taking care of the kids. He's sitting on the couch yelling at the sports team on the TV with a beer in his hand. I say, can I get some help here? And he said, yeah, just a minute, I've got to watch this touchdown or whatever it is. And so she says, I have a third child. What's the point of being married to this third child? What's going on there? Why is there this image of the husband as the couch potato?
I'd like to think that it's not so common anymore, but I don't know. I think certainly there's a place in there where that particular wife did not say early enough, hey, this is not okay. I'm not going to live with this way. That either, they felt stuck in the marriage because they have kids and they needed the support or whatever, but even before there were kids, maybe there wasn't that kind of clear, differentiated expression from the wife. And, that may be that for them and their own conditioning, and they weren't taught that they can speak out that way. That's too scary. That's, women just don't do that. And so that, leaves them even more stuck in that situation.
So if that couple came to you, what would you advise her to do to motivate him rather than criticize him?
Well, yeah. Rather than criticize, I think that's a good way of saying it, because I think the criticism is not going to work. What she has to do is she has to speak about her own internal experience.
Oh.
I'm feeling neglected. I'm feeling unimportant. I'm feeling worried. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling alone. All that kind of stuff. If it comes across as blame, as criticism, his ears close. And it's not, you don't have any great assurance that his ears aren't going to close if she starts talking about her feelings, too.
But it's not going to be an automatic defense.
Right.
What especially attracted you to EFT? Why did you think Sue Johnson's really got a approach that I want to use?
Well, I think I had some sense that attachment is a very powerful force that we really hadn't paid enough attention to. And in attachment, it's not just about being attached. A large part, maybe the largest part of the work with attachment is around fear. The fears of attachment, what can happen if you get attached, the difficulties of attachment, all that kind of stuff is so important. And it drives us in a lot of ways. It drives couples in a lot of ways.
So fear I'll be abandoned, fear I'll be smothered.
Well, yeah, in the attachment process, yes, right. If I put myself out there, you're not going to hear me. And here I am naked out here showing myself, and you're not paying attention. And
or I'll hear you and not like it.
Or that's possible too. Yeah, right.
So say more about how one gets out of one's childhood bonding pattern. I guess the first step is I've got to recognize it and name it.
Yeah. First step is to recognize it and name it. See what the reactive behaviors are. Begin to understand, what is the story I have about you? Based on my conditioning, well, you don't care about me anyway. And so whatever that story is, that's going in my head, that's that story, which also connects with the story about myself. Well, I'm really not that valuable. I'm really not lovable. All those kind of stories. Those are powerful forces that drive our reactive responses. And so the more that we can be clear, first of all, know that reactive response. Begin to know what the story is, especially a story I have about you. And then begin to understand, okay, and what am I thinking about myself? And it takes usually longer to get to the story about yourself. But the story that you have about yourself, and how is that driving my attachment process? And then beginning to look at, okay, well, what's the underlying need here? What is the need that I'm afraid to put out there? What is the need that I'm missing?
So for you, let's see if I've got this. The story would be growing up, you don't really fit. So we don't know how to deal with you. You're kind of on your own. You figure it out. And
well, yeah, I was sent to tutors and other people that would shape me the way I needed to be shaped.
So, but the implication is you're not really okay.
Yeah, right. Because you need this. You're not okay.
Right.
You're not acceptable as you are.
Right. And so then you picked a first marriage where you could kind of stay not risking showing who you were. And then you evolved and said, okay, I'm willing to show who I am. You're not that interested, so we can't proceed.
Mm-hmm.
And then in your second marriage, you found someone who was interested and was willing to be vulnerable and open as well.
Well, we had to grow that. We had to work on that.
And can you give an example of an issue that you'd be willing to share where you went back and forth and worked something out? I think it's really helpful to people if there's a specific example, a case study. So you gave the example of the house, the buying a house, and that's pretty straightforward because it's kind of up to her. It's her house.
Well, she wants me to contribute.
Right. But ultimately, it's her house.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of another example where you went back and forth and resolved something? What about like step parenting issues, dealing with your kids?
Well, that's certainly been a challenging place for us in the beginning with my son Josh. He was a little difficult as a child, but then after his accident, when he came out of a coma, he came and lived with us for a while, and that was a very fraught time for us. And the way out of that actually was we got him his own house. But I'm sure there are places where we work stuff through. There's nothing that's coming to mind right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I just can't. There's probably lots of them, but I just can't think of any right now.
So if you were going to kind of, in a nutshell, say what Susan Johnson would emphasize when you're dealing with your attachment issues, you need to understand your story, understand the story you project on your partner, name it. What else is really important to evolve out of it?
What the need is.
So
well,
everybody's need is to feel secure.
Yeah, even before that, I think fear is the first thing that shows up.
Oh, fear of not being able to depend on you.
Right. What is the fear that is associated with the attachment? If I move towards attachment with you, you're not going to hear me. You're going to judge me. You're going to think that I'm not okay. I'm going to show the more vulnerable me, and you're not going to be there, and I'm going to be left all alone and say, what the hell did I do that for? Once again, I'm alone, and here I am. All those fears are really important. You can't really get to the secure attachment without engaging the fears.
Okay.
It's like what she calls the reach. What is the fear that you have with reaching for the other?
Mm-hmm. And do you think people can do this on their own? It seems like you really have to have a therapist to help you really dig into these stories.
I think so.
Because there's so much a part of you, it's really hard to see them.
Well, and you have to, as a therapist, my work with couples, a lot of it is slowing the process down. Stop, slow, whoa, wait, what's going on? Bringing people back, what are you actually feeling right now? Because when the reactivity is running strong like that, nothing much happens other than the trench gets dug deeper.
You did this, and you said this, and you.
Right.
Have you seen the Showtime series Couples Therapy?
No, I don't think so.
It's really interesting. It's a real live show, real therapy with a PhD psychologist.
Hmm.
And what she emphasizes is that people blame their partner for their own wound that prevents them from intimacy. And she says appreciating the difference with the other, with a capital O, allows for growth. But they tend to blame instead of be introspective, which I guess is just part of our defense mechanisms. It's easier for me to say it's your fault
Right,
than I got to dig into my stuff.
right, right, right.
So do you find that your couples tend to blame each other?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You don't understand me. You're lazy. You're what a jerk. Whatever it is.
Right. And that has to be interrupted because that's not going to work at all. And so I take the blame and say, okay, well, let's slow down for a minute. So you're saying this, and so you're probably feeling frustrated because you're wanting more of this from them. Just to reflect it back into their own needs, their own fears, their own story about themselves.
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to undo the blame.
Mm-hmm. Um, in the graduate school that you got your degree from, your master's, they, at least when I knew about it, emphasized Kharkov. So active listening. Sounds like you're feeling da 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 because da da da. But then that doesn't go very deep because it's just reflecting back how people are feeling. It doesn't do the work of, well, why are you feeling this, and let's interrupt some of those patterns. So am I reading it wrong, Kharkov?
It's been so long since I've looked at Kharkov that it's hard for me to say, but I think you're right. I mean, you have to slow that process down, identify the feeling, validate it, and then you can begin to find, okay, so where do you think this comes from? But partly what happens is that if you do that, if you go to the why part, it shifts people up into their head, out of the more vulnerable sense. So just staying with the feeling sometimes, rather than trying to sort of put the history out there connected to it. Although you can do that through validation, of course you're going to feel that way. Based on what you went through, somebody has a lot of trauma. Yeah, of course getting close feels scary. Of course you stiffen up when they hug you. Because, yeah, being close was dangerous for you as a child. So you validate it that way. And as you validate it and you allow room for it, if you can keep sort of adding the emotional context to that, oftentimes the history or the origins will begin to show up on its own.
Oh,
But if you feed the history in right then, you may be wrong, and that would derail the process. But it also brings them up into their head when you're trying to keep them in their heart.
hmm. Would you say, could you put a percentage on of the couples that come to you thinking about maybe we got to get divorced, we can't make this work? Roughly what percent work through it, and roughly what percent say, okay, we're getting divorced?
Um, Maybe 10%.
10% which way?
10% go to divorce.
Oh, and what do you see in the 10% who divorce? What do they have something going on that?
Well, there can be an original mismatch that really just is insurmountable. There can be trauma, addiction, issues that are huge. And like with trauma, both trauma and addiction, it's like those are like a third party in the relationship.
Yeah.
And so that complicates things a lot.
What's an example of a mismatch? I mean, I'm Catholic, you're Jewish. Is that enough to be a mismatch, or what's an example of a mismatch that's really difficult?
Um, well, actually, in thinking about that, it's probably not the mismatch as much as it is the willingness to unpack the difference.
Hmm.
If you're rigidly stuck in your difference and you're not willing to open to how that difference is for the other person, then there isn't a great chance.
It's so interesting to me. John Gottman said that I think 69% of couples' issues, disagreements are irreconcilable. You want to have kids, I don't. You want the kids to do this, I don't. But so it's not therefore it means that differences aren't the problem, it's how we relate to them.
Right, right.
I mean, that's a
Exactly.
lot. Two-thirds are irreconcilable. How does anybody cope with that?
Well, it's not. Uh, yeah, couples oftentimes come in and they want resolution around differences, and it's really not about that because, first of all, it's impossible to achieve most of the time. But um, it's more about the process and the understanding, so that, and this is where I end up with couples oftentimes, is this sense of I need to understand why this is painful for you when I go to this place. And then I can come back to you and say, I know this is painful for you. I get that. And I have to do this. So it's that bearing in mind, it's that sense of consideration in the difference that allows relationship to evolve, I think. I don't think it's about this melding type of resolution. I don't think there's certainly some issues where you can do that. But that arrives, I think, more through an understanding about why that particular issue is so important to the other person. What's at stake for them there?
A really common difference is men want to have sex more often than women, and
Mm-hmm.
men think they have sex less than women think they have it. Is that physiological, or it's just like that's an outlet for men to be intimate, or what do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I think, um, well, it does seem that for women, particularly after they've been raising children, that the sex drive diminishes. Whether that's because of nursing and all that, or something, or just
They're tired.
tired. I've been on my feet taking care of three kids all day long.
I want to
And
go to sleep.
that. But the thing that I would say about that is, well, what is the sex? Is it about just getting off, or is it about a connection? And if you've been on your feet all day long and you're exhausted, how does sex become work that contributes to your exhaustion? How can it become a place of connection between the two of you? And I think, in terms of, the difference in sex, I think oftentimes I find myself exploring what does it mean with the men? What does it mean? What does it bring you to be sexual with your wife? And, it's the difference between getting fucked and making love. And, oftentimes there is, and I think it takes a lot of exploring that sense of what do I get out of it? What does it mean for me? Is it just, I'm done, I'm great, I'm going to go watch the game now? Or is it, I want to stay here, I want to just cuddle with you and feel, you talk about the oxytocin that's there. Do I want to sink into that oxytocin place with you for a minute? But that requires a kind of vulnerability. And we all have fears around vulnerability. And that's one of the things that I encourage people to talk about. Whoa, this is like right at the edge of my capacity right here. Would you mind if I left and did something else?
Yes, I would mind.
Yeah. Well, it's a discussion then at that point. Well, at the edge of your vulnerability, tell me more about that. Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that. Well, I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed. This is so close. I don't know what to do with it, and this closeness scares me a little bit. Oh, what's the fear? Can we talk about that? Do I scare you? And
Boy.
it's not just men. I mean, sometimes there are women who say, okay, I'm done with that. I'm going to go do something else.
I read James Carville's and Mary Matlin's book, and James said for him, sex is like eating and sleeping. He's got to do it every day.
That's interesting. I don't think that's true for all men. I
No.
know there are men, I've heard that, from other couples, nope, I got to have sex every day. But, it's like, well, what does it mean to you to have sex? Is it just a conquest? Is it just getting off? What is it?
A relaxation technique.
Yeah.
Tension release.
That drives you to have sex every day. That maybe that quantity has reduced the quality that's in that.
Is there anything else that you would add in terms of raising boys to be full human beings, or having couples understand each other better? EFT, anything that we haven't talked about that comes to mind that you'd like people to think about as a tool?
Well, I think, central to that with boys is not to diminish in any way their needs, not to make fun of their sensitivity, their softness, that's a very real, valuable part that they have. And to understand, because sometimes if you're a vulnerable kid in school, you get picked on.
Yeah.
And to really understand, that's not okay. And to stand up for them and fight for that. No, you have the right to be who you are.
And any other suggestions for couples?
Couple work is hard work.
It's probably the hardest.
It takes work to maintain a relationship.
Everybody says that, but what does that mean?
Well, it means sometimes you have to get into therapy. Sometimes you have to sit down with each other and say, okay, look, where are we? I've been struggling with this feeling about you for a long time. Can we talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I would say is that it's really important for couples to get away into nature. Because nature can be very softening and healing. And to have adventures together.
To keep things interesting and different.
Yeah. Well, to be, sort of exploring the world together, taking those challenges together.
Yeah, that's really a team building effort. Where's the most interesting place that you and Elizabeth have been that's out of the country?
Most interesting, geez. Bali was great, but that's sort of like that's a very feminine place. It's very soft. It's very warm. The massages are great. The water is wonderful. People are very kind. Africa.
Where?
Kenya. On safari in Kenya.
Wow.
That was, I think we both agree, that was a pretty profound experience. Sleeping in a tent, hearing lions roaring outside and hippos walking around outside your tent and all that. I mean, it was very comfortable too. They serve you breakfast in the morning and give you a gin and tonic out on your safari and all that. It was very, very comfortable. But it's like, we had really good guides while we were there. And one of the early things we saw is he said, okay, watch this. And we watched a lion, a pride of lions, eat a warthog right in front of us. Well, the warthog was screaming as he was being chewed up.
Mm.
It was like, oh my God, this is a powerful event to see. Coupled with, the next day driving into his thicket with this guy in this open Jeep and saying, shh, watch. And suddenly a lioness comes out and she's like 5 feet away from me. And she looks around and she looks at you. And then this little lion baby, this big, comes out of the bush.
Oh.
And then another one comes out of the bush. And she's sort of watching them and watching you, and they're just sort of being kittens right there. It was profound experience.
Great. That's a good note to end on. Thank you.